Let's see. Everyone's starting to come in. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Rachel Savasic-Luxton. I'm the Director of Research and Training here at the Dibble Institute, and I am thrilled to welcome you all to today's webinar, Profound Ideas on the Nature of Commitment. We are honored and thrilled to have Dr. Scott Stanley here as our first webinar presenter of 2026, where he'll be discussing the nature of commitment. I'll introduce Dr. Stanley in just a moment, but first I want to go through a couple of housekeeping things. First is if you cannot hear the presentation, we encourage you to check your audio settings located in the control panel in Zoom. If that doesn't work, please dial in using the number found in your invite, or sometimes popping out and then popping back in will also do the trick. I'm not sure about handouts, but if we do have any handouts, I should have double checked that. I apologize. They will be located in the chat box in the control panel. We will also be sending any attachments or handouts when we provide you with the recording in a couple of days from now. We're also excited to have all of you here, just as excited as we are to have Dr. Stanley. So we encourage you to find that chat box again and tell us who you are and where you're joining us from. We're excited to have you all here. I want to say the chat is open. Again, you can find that in your control panel. We're going to be keeping the chat open in today's presentation so that you can engage with Dr. Stanley at different points. But I also want to draw your attention to the Q&A box in your control panel. If you have questions for us or for Dr. Stanley that will be answered at the end of the session and probably the last 15-20 minutes, please put those in the Q&A box. We ask that you do that because we hope that there's going to be a lot of engagement in the chat, and we want to make sure that your important questions don't get mixed up. So fun, exciting, conversational insight, please add that in the chat. If you have a question, please put it in the Q&A box and we will make sure to get to it there. Okay. The other point is, questions, the Q&A box. I think I just made that clear. We won't spend any more time on that. Hopefully y'all have been able to locate it. The other thing is closed captioning is available in your control panel should you choose to use it. Okay. And I just want to do a quick shout out to see where people are joining us from. We've got friends from Pro Youth, Sacramento, University of Delaware Extension, let's see, Washington State, a doctoral student at the University of South Carolina, Youth and Family Services. We've got folks, a fellow Florida State University. Sorry, I just have to shout you out. That is where I did my bachelor's and master's degree. So go Noles. Okay, but I'm excited to see everybody else who's here as well from all over. Okay, I'm not sure how many of you are new to the Dibble Institute. Like I said, saw some friendly names and faces that I'm familiar with, but I don't necessarily recognize everybody. So if you're new to us, I want to take a moment to acknowledge our wonderful founders who gave us our name. On the screen here, you will see a picture of Charlie and Helen Dibble. Charlie did a lot of work with youth during his retirement, and he saw a lot of them having difficulties around their relationships, or when parents were having difficulties in their relationship, the impact that it was having on those youth that Charlie worked with and spent time with. So he had the brilliant idea to translate research into teaching tools that could then be made widely available to help kind of navigate these difficulties and challenges for young people. So the Dibble Institute itself is not a direct service provider. Rather, we develop research-based practices and make them available to organizations who, like I said, have joined us today, and hopefully maybe you who will start to use us if you are new to us. A little bit more about who we are now since Charlie founded us decades ago. We are a national independent nonprofit organization. We have clients in all 50 states who are providing direct services, so we thank you for the great work that you are doing. Last year, based on our very conservative estimates, so 2024 to 2025, we believe our clients reached almost 117,000 youth based on materials purchased. So we just want to take a moment to say how grateful we are to all of you who are here, and even those of you who are not here, but that are doing this important work with young people. We thank you, and we are grateful to you and for you. So for an independent national nonprofit organization, what guides us? And part of what guides us is our mission. And our mission is to empower youth and young adults with skills to build and sustain healthy interpersonal and romantic relationships. We know that when we have these conversations with young people, it pulls a lot of levers. So we're thinking pregnancy prevention, dating violence prevention, the mental health lever, job readiness, and so much more. In addition to being guided by our mission, we are also guided by our values. So, the first one is that we are big believers in research. All of our programs are research based, and we continue to strive for evaluations on our programs to demonstrate their impact and their effectiveness. So, that means as new information comes out, we make updates to our program and like to highlight the important research that is out there that impacts the work that we do. Another core value is that we believe in safe, stable, and nurturing families of all different family formations. And this is our goal for young people to be raised in these families and, if they so choose, to have them for themselves moving forward. And lastly, we believe that relationship education is for everyone. All of us can improve our relationships, and we make sure that our programs are reflective of that. I love sitting in on our trainings because it's fun to see the light bulbs go off. So across the lifespan, these skills are useful and relevant. Okay, so that's the Dibble Institute and who we are. I love seeing more stuff coming into the chat. Keep the introductions going. And on the topic of introductions, I'm going to go ahead and introduce to you Dr. Scott Stanley, who is the reason you are all here today. Dr. Stanley is a research professor at the University of Denver and a clinical psychologist with decades of experience working with couples and individuals regarding relationship issues. As a researcher, Dr. Stanley has published extensively on subjects including commitment, cohabitation, relationship development, and the prevention of relationship distress. Scott Stanley and Howard Markman started the PrEP companies in 1991 with the goal of disseminating research-based information and evidence-based skills and strategies for people to build and maintain strong relationships. And it feels like a full circle moment because I've actually cited them in research papers during my graduate school work. So with that, I want to go ahead and welcome Dr. Scott Stanley and turn it over to him for his presentation today.
Rachel, thank you very much for that terrific introduction. And I want to thank everyone at Dibble. Known Kay Reed such a long time, and Aaron and Kim and everybody. What a great organization. And I'm really delighted to be able to do this webinar and happy to be here with folks. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to cover essentially some of my favorite ideas from the world of commitment theory and the different kind of work that I and colleagues such as Galena Rhodes and others have done on commitment and cohabitation. This isn't a talk on cohabitation. I've done that with Galena a time or two actually for Dibble, though that's a very commitment-oriented talk. This is a purely commitment-oriented talk. And the structure of it is I'm really just walking through certain ideas that seem to me to be really important and really valuable in the whole nature of understanding commitment. Now, I'm going to put up some slides. I have to say that my slides, I didn't try to make them pretty. In fact, I was still working on them like about a half an hour ago in terms of some sequences and some things. They're really my outline as much or more than anything. But I decided I'd put them up there. In Zoom, you have the choice, I believe, to just look at me or to have the slides up or in a little version of me, a mini me. I think that's how that works. So you can choose whichever one you want. But you could just close your eyes and listen if you want. But some of the ideas will be on the slides, and we will send a copy of the slides. I'll send at least one journal article that's really accessible afterwards, and whatever else we can come up with. Anyway, love Dibble. Happy to be here. I wear two hats in life. One is the research side at the university, and the other is all the work on prep that we do in terms of putting research-based ideas into curricula. So, an entity a lot like Dibble and just pals and partners with Dibble, in fact, in a lot of efforts. So, can't say enough good things about Dibble. So I'm glad you're all here. This talk, I'm looking for certain spots where we can talk about questions and have some discussion. If we don't get through all my slides, I only have 233. That's not true. There's like a few big ideas I want to cover. If we don't get through everything, that's actually fine because I could come back and cover some other stuff another time. If we do, that's great. So at the start, you should all see this title slide now. Let me click in my window. I want to first just to acknowledge some major influences on my own thinking about commitment and relationship dynamics, especially Michael Johnson at Penn State. He's retired now, but his way of viewing the theory of commitment in the whole world of commitment theory, people kind of are all working with very similar concepts. There's similar parts and pieces to the puzzle that virtually every major theorist has seen related to commitment. But people put it together in different ways. And the way that I like to put things together is most similar to Michael Johnson and how he did it. And it makes the most sense to me. Gleena Rhodes, longtime colleague, just we've done a lot of work, and a lot of it is about cohabitation, but it's really about the nature of commitment and how it develops and what's a challenge. We'll come back to a bit about that later uh, in an interesting way, I think. Thibault and Kelly, social psychologists from decades ago, who were very influential. They rarely actually used the word commitment, but their whole theory of social exchange was very influential, especially in psychology, about how it works. Howard Markman, my long-term colleague and Howard founded the whole idea of prep and working with Howard since 1977, even though I know I only look like I'm 45, but that's actually true. Um, just a wonderful collaboration. Carol Rusbolt, who's passed on, is a psychologist, was a psychologist, social psychologist. She did immensely great theoretical work in commitment, and especially one sort of perspective on how it develops. Galena and I have a pretty different perspective actually on how it develops, but Carol influenced the whole field, and her and graduate students that worked with her have just had an immense impact on the whole field of understanding commitment. Now, I'm going to go through some contrasts, and I won't even read the contrasts on this slide because you're about to see them on different slides, but I want to contrast several things because they really help understand sort of what is commitment, what is sort of the things that are involved in it, and then um, what's it not? What's it different from? But first off, and this is where this sort of division between constraint and dedication is what I mean by a major influence by Mike Johnson. Because you can think about a lot of the things that one might measure to understand commitment in a relationship. You can break it down a lot of ways, but to me, this fundamental distinction between the push and the pull of constraint and dedication is the most valuable distinction in many ways for understanding things, including how commitment feels, what happens to people, what goes right, what goes wrong in development. It's an important distinction. Essentially, let's start with dedication. Usually, when a social scientist, a psychologist, a sociologist, economist talk about commitment, they're really talking about what I like. I like Mike Johnson's word. I like the word dedication. They're really talking about dedication. So dedication is more about I'm deciding to do this. I have an identity with this person. I'm making this a priority. I'm choosing this. I'm willing to sacrifice. I'm willing to like not choose other things. Dedication's really, when most people just say the word commitment, they probably mean something closer to dedication than constraint. But the other side of understanding commitment is really important, which is constraint. And constraint is the easiest way to define it, but it's a little pejorative, is constraints are the things that keep people there when they might rather leave. So constraints are the things that sort of accumulate around relationships. They're kind of investments or things that come with the behavior of the relationship. That if one decided they wanted to leave or started to think about wanting to leave, whatever the relationship or whatever its condition, they would be costs of leaving. And it could be invested resources and stuff and a life together. It could be beliefs about divorce. That's a whole different kind of constraints, or beliefs about should I continue or not, even if I'm unhappy, or about what's best for the children, social pressure, what would others think, and just what's my overall alternative quality. We'll come back to alternatives because I want to talk a fair amount about just all different ways of thinking about alternatives on different sides of dedication and constraint. But that just gives you a gist of when I say constraint versus dedication, that's what I mean. And for the most part, if I just say commitment without clarifying further, I mean dedication more than constraint. I might mean both, but it's usually going to be more about dedication in terms of what I'm saying. So, one distinction is involvement versus commitment. It's really important to distinguish what's the difference between two people having an association, some connection, hanging out together, spending time together, whatever, versus what makes it a commitment. Now, obviously, if somebody just met somebody and there's really no involvement, then that's not even on the slide. That's not what we're talking about. Christine Johnson, who we published some papers with and met long ago when we started doing all the work that we do at Prep in Oklahoma, she's at Oklahoma State and a really great mind, great researcher. We did a survey in the state of Oklahoma related to things that public strategies and the Department of Human Services were doing in Oklahoma, going way back now to starting in 2000. And I remember we were presenting findings and Christine got up and wanted to make a point about commitment. And it blew me away. I mean, it was not like, it was just like a great point to make. And I'm going to put up an image, but what she did is she held up some papers held together by a paper clip, and another bunch of papers held together by a staple, and she shook them a little bit. And you can just visualize this. I'm not going to do this because of the little screen here. But you can imagine, you shake it a bit, and the papers held together by the paper clip are going to come apart pretty fast and be all over the floor. And the paper's held by the staple, you'd have to really start shaking it more for that to come apart. And I thought that was a brilliant way to get across the idea of having a connection or an involvement versus being committed. Because commitment is going to involve something more in terms of the difficulty of things coming apart. It may involve sort of kind of a piercing, if you will, not in the way we talk about piercings these days, but more of like, so a piercing in terms of connection. Something's really tightly holding on. And if you think about a staple versus a paper clip, to get the papers apart with the staple, you're actually going to destroy something. You're going to have to damage something to pull that apart. You're going to have to bend the staple. You're going to have to tear the papers. It's just a much stronger sort of attachment connection or being held togetherness. That's going to be my word for the moment, than what you get with a paper clip. And it's a very nice illustration. Nothing wrong with paper clips, nothing wrong with staples, but they do different things. And I'll be making the point in a few minutes that I think sometimes people confuse this or confuse attachment versus commitment, which I'll come to after this next one. Satisfaction is another thing to distinguish between commitment. I think as a researcher, it's much better having a concept of satisfaction or viewing it as an outcome than as something that implies sort of behavior. Many of you are old enough to remember, I don't know how long ago this was, the song Don't Worry, Be Happy. You think about that song, it was a big hit. I'm feeling like it's 25 years ago. Don't worry, be happy. Well, that's a great sort of philosophy, and it's actually an instruction, it's an idea, it's sort of a little moment of relationship education or life education. Don't worry, be happy. But be happy doesn't actually tell you anything to do. It doesn't give you some sort of sense of the behavior that you could do to make a difference or to be happy. You can certainly come up with behaviors you could do to be happy. But don't worry, be happy is like more of a philosophy or a motto. And that's the way satisfaction is. Satisfaction doesn't imply things a person has done or could do to change the relationship. It more implies just how happy are they right now with how it's going. And that's, I think, a really important distinction, which I'll come back to in another way after this distinction. Galena and I and Sarah Witten have a paper, and this is the paper we'll send to you after the webinar on just a whole orientation about what's about commitment theory, about what is commitment in relationships and different ways it's been thought of and how we think of it. And one of the things we do in that paper is we distinguish between attachment and commitment. And this is an important distinction in a couple of ways. There's sort of the common vernacular, which is sort of the Jane Austen version of attachment. Jane Austen, if you follow, if you've read any of her stuff or watched her movies, she used the word attachment a lot. And when she talks about attachment, she's not talking about the big psychological theory of attachment that came, d decades, decades later, not hundreds of years later, came later, especially from Bowlby and Ainsworth. She's really talking about just the idea of a romantic attachment. So a bond or something that's growing between two people that's sort of this romantic, it's a love connection, and in Jane Austen's world, romantic attachment was a pretty serious stage of relationship that was maybe likely going to develop into something further, may develop into marriage. A lot of her books are about exactly that time period, about picking the right person. I have a great blog article at the Institute for Family Studies or on my website, Sliding versus Deciding, on what Jane Austen knew about relationship development. If you're a Jane Austen fan, I think you'd like it a lot. So attachment, though, is also not commitment because attachment is more, even as we move into like the Bowlby theory about childhood development and a sense of having a security and emotional bond with parents that sort of sets a stage for like a lifelong attachment orientation or style. People use different words. I'm not even sure what's in vogue right now about that. But their whole idea was that based back in childhood and experiences with caregivers, Bowlby and Ainsworth would make the point that people develop sort of a way of going about attachment. They might be insecure about it and anxious. They might be sort of hyperactive about it. They might be very secure about it and sort of easygoing in relationships. So they might avoid it. And those different dynamics have been explored a lot in the whole research on psychology. Shaver and Hazan, and then a slew of other people really brought all that thinking into adult relationships. Commitment in contrast, so attachment's really about emotional security and perhaps a person's foundation for it, but commitment's much more about what creates persistence and stability in a relationship. And you can see that even back to the idea of dedication and constraint. Constraints can produce a lot of stability and some persistence, but dedication and constraint together is going to produce the most stable relationship with a lot of persistence. And a theme I'll get to when we get way further down into talking is just the whole idea of commitment being based much more on sort of a conscious choice or a pledge. It's a decisional thing versus something that I'm experiencing or feeling based on my life, how my life's gone. The point that we make, and this is one of my favorite one-liners, commitment is what secures attachment. This is why commitment is so fundamentally important in important relationships in life. And this could be parent-child, but it could also be romantic, adult to adult. Commitment's really what secures attachment. Attachment itself relates to that feeling of security and the history of how one has done about it, but it's commitment that's going to be related to, is it actually secure? Does this actually continue? Can I count on this? Do we have a future in a way that I expect that I want? And different aspects of commitment go into that or develop that. Now, here's one of my favorite sections from Jane Austen. Yeah, there's a lot of words there, but I'm going to read them to you. Now, you could read them, but why bother? Because I'm going to read them. Uh, I love Pride and Prejudice more than Sense and Sensibility. I was just telling Galena last week, and I think she just watched this version last week because I brought it up. Uh, Especially the more recent, the more modern Pride and Prejudice movie, which is a little more romantically toned than like the PBS series. It's a great story, at least for me. I mean, I really enjoyed the story. Sense and Sensibility, I feel like, is a little bit rougher in terms of her work. I forget which was written first, but it feels to me like it's less. It's a great theme, it's a great novel, but she's a little more technical in it, and I think there was some points she wanted to make in it that are theoretical. And there's this great section where she's making this distinction between attachment and commitment. And it involves her and her mother being puzzled about whether her sister Marianne and this guy who turns out to be a cad named Willoughby is actually whether they're actually committed. And her mother, who's Mrs. Dashwood, thinks that they obviously are. Look how affectionate they are. Look how much they stare at each other. All this, and Eleanor is like, I'm not sure at all. And so, in one part of the dialogue, and I've cut out some of the amount of words here. Uh, the mother says, "But do you admit the justice of what I've said in his defense?" She's defending Willoughby. "I am happy, and he is acquitted." And Eleanor says, "Not entirely. It may be proper to conceal their engagement, if they are engaged, from Mrs. Smith, but that is no excuse from their concealing it from us." Now, that's the whole question. Are they actually engaged, or are they just like messing around? Whatever definition of messing around would exist at the time. And Mrs. Dashwood says, "Concealing it from us, this is strange indeed when your eyes have been reproaching them every day for incautiousness." Because Eleanor had been like, wow, they're just way too like open about this attraction for not having announced that anything serious is going on. And Mrs. Dashwood says, "Concealing it from us, this is strange indeed." Well, I just read that part. Eleanor says, "I want no proof of their affection, but of their engagement I do." So that's the crux. Are they engaged or not? And Mrs. Dashwood says, My Eleanor, is it possible to doubt their engagement? How could such a thought occur to you?" And Eleanor says, "I confess that every circumstance except one is in favor of their engagement because the attachment they see is so strong. But that one is the total silence of both on the subject, and with me it almost outweighs every other." There is so much going on there, but I just want to highlight this point. Eleanor really gets that commitment and a declaration of commitment, something that's clear and public and salient, is very different than just being attached. I mean, just being attached is attachment can be a really powerful big thing, but commitment is like another level about what's going on here and where we're headed. And Mrs. Dashwood, the mother, actually is, I think, her view here is very much like sort of a modern view that many people have, where they infer commitment where there may not be any, or it may not be at all clear that it's commitment. It may just be a lot of attraction and attachment. Now, through all of that, what I think commitment is different than attachment and satisfaction is just this idea of there being something to grab. Commitment implies, if you think back to that list, especially the things I shared about dedication, it's about things, levers one could pull. You can grab hold of things, you can do things, you can make something happen, thinking about what could I do to increase the sense that we're an us today? What could I do to show or act on my priority about this relationship? How can I better protect our relationship from alternatives that I find attractive? What can we do to reinforce a sense of a future? Commitment implies things you can do. And that's one of the things that's great about commitment. Also makes it very useful in a relationship education context. Now, if there's any thoughts or the questions at this point, go ahead and put them in the question box or somewhere that Rachel can get at them and nudge me. I don't think there's any there at the moment, so I'm going to keep going on. But if you have some as I go, go ahead. Next thing I want to talk about is alternatives. And This is the simplest, it's not the simplest, it's the quickest point I'm going to make today. But it's one I've always loved. When you think about alternatives play a fundamentally really important role in understanding commitment. And they're on both sides of the house. They're on the constraint side and they're on the dedication side. The question about alternatives when it comes to constraint is what's the quality of them? Tebow and Kelly called this the comparison level for alternatives. And their idea was that people tend to stay or leave based on not only just their comparison level, which is their internal sense of what I expect in this relationship. So, how satisfied are they with it? But how satisfied did they think they would be with the alternatives? And this, I'm using the idea even more broader here. A person's perception of relationship uh, options, of alternative, the quality of their alternatives is going to both be a key aspect of how challenging or not it is to maintain their commitment. In some ways, really attractive alternatives make it a little harder to maintain a commitment that you've made. But they fundamentally are about, well, how good are my options or how good do I think my options are? So it functions as a constraint. Alternative monitoring in contrast, and this is a concept I've loved from 1983 when I first started digging into this literature and a paper by Leek and Lake. I don't know if I'm pronouncing their names exactly right. Never met them. You'll notice by the way the funky font there, the old Courier font. I pasted that right out of my dissertation just because I could and I wanted to as an image. I just love the old text and the way that looks. Um, my dissertation's all about this stuff. And Lake and Lake just summed up this point beautifully. We define interpersonal commitment as an unwillingness to consider any exchange partner other than those of the current relationship. If commitment is present, monitoring of alternatives has ceased. Now, let me uh, let me be clear about something here. Everybody's going to, from time to time, monitor alternatives or be aware of attractive alternatives. You could be in a very committed relationship and be strongly dedicated to your partner, but you're going to be attracted to other people at times, and for maybe different reasons or different characteristics. Could be physical, could be personality, could be, attraction's just going to happen unless maybe you're dead. Maybe is that too strong? Is that too? I don't think it is. Um, what alternative monitoring gets at, and this is how we've measured it in our work, is how much is one seriously thinking about what would it be like to be with somebody else, or to could be the alternative is to be with nobody. What would that be like? When somebody is struggling with dedication in a relationship, they are going to start or have already started monitoring alternatives more. And once people really start seriously thinking about the what ifs and the alternatives, you can imagine it gets very challenging for the relationship because it's pretty hard for a real existing relationship to compete with something that's essentially a fantasy. I think this would be great. I think that person or that kind of person would be so much better for me or so wonderful. Well, there'll be a lot of problems there as well, but we don't tend to see those when we're just noticing somebody or attracted to somebody. It'd be very easy to sort of miss thinking about the challenges and really load up on that. So, a serious alternative monitoring becomes a real threat to dedication, and it starts in pretty quickly. When satisfaction drops enough, people tend to start what ifing, or I could have had a V8, if you like that metaphor and thinking about it. Now, I'll come to these questions in a minute. I just want to comment on Ritchie, Stanley, Rhodes, and Markman, a really nice paper. There's a number of nice publications on this sort of theoretical stream right here about alternative monitoring. What Lane Ritchie did with one of our data sets that Galina and I started developing in 2005, which was a national longitudinal data set, is she did a lot of complex multi-level modeling and using the longitudinal sample to look at alternative monitoring over time and how it related to two outcomes. And and both things happened that she expected. And this is like kind of what the theory would predict and expect, but it's nice in research sometimes to show that the theory is right. So in her analyses, people that were more seriously monitoring alternatives and where the monitoring increased over time were more likely to end up having an affair, and they were more likely to end up breaking up. Some broke up without having an affair, some had an affair and I'm sure broke up. But those outcomes were more likely when people had started thinking a lot about the what ifs. And now let me go to the questions that are up on the board. I just love that contrast. There's so many paradoxes in a way, or contrasts that are interesting in commitment. And I like that one a lot about different ways to think about alternatives. Alan Hawkins asked, if commitment implies things that we do, what are two leading behaviors that can increase commitment in a romantic relationship? Notice how Alan asks that question because it's pretty precise. Because you could ask the question, what are things you could do to increase the quality of the relationship that are based on commitment? But that's not what I think Alan's asking. What could you do to increase commitment? And one that stands out to me is, well, two. First would be sort of reflective. Am I really in this? Did I really choose this, or is this where I intend to be? One way to increase commitment is to ask ourselves and think about what could I do more? And you'll notice where I'm going to go with this, to act on commitment. Or even if I don't always feel it, to act like I'm committed. So uh, when people start to move, when people start to behave in line with where they want to be, or where they want to go, or who they want to be, it tends to start to change how they think and feel. So we could actually increase our dedication to someone by starting to behave in more dedicated ways toward them, thinking about the things that that would look like. What would that mean? What does that do? If I start doing more of those things, the feelings, the thoughts, the sense that I am really committed to this person, look at what I'm doing, is going to grow and develop. That's a very clear sort of psychological dynamic in how we work. So we could wait for the feelings and the motive to come along, or we could choose to act in that way, and that stuff is going to start to come along. The other thing that people can do, and I'll come back to this later because people have to be a little careful about this, is look for ways to kind of be declarative about commitment. And, either to the partner, to others, hey, telling a best friend, I'm going to start doing more of this in my relationship because I think it would be really good. If I tell somebody else that, somebody whose opinion I care about, that I'm going to start giving a little more. I'm going to start working a little harder in terms of making time. I'm going to do this or that. And making time for the relationship is going to be a big one, of course. Uh, I'm actually putting out there to somebody else. I'm making it now part of a social contract. Could be like a big public announcement. Those have their own downside, but some kind of proclamation or statement to a witness, to somebody else, is going to increase my sense of commitment and my likelihood of following through. Now, let's go to the next question. I don't know if I can pronounce your Ginver. I'm sorry for not knowing how to pronounce your name, but I can sure read the question. Using the framework of dedication versus constraint, would it be fair to say that in a divorce breakup situation, the couples choosing to stay for the kids are using the couple that's choosing to stay for the sake of the kids are using both dedication and constraint? This is one of the most this is a specific question about a general thing about the relationship between dedication and constraint. There are a lot of times and moments in a marriage, in a relationship between parents, where things are kind of tough uh, between the two people. I mean, that people should understand, and this is an important element of what we can all do in terms of helping people with relationship education. Really important for people to understand that that's normal. You know, you hit dry spells, you hit periods of time where it's hard, and people need to know that that's normal. But one of the things that where constraints become very valuable is constraints kind of put the brakes on a lot of short-term destructive behavior where somebody could unwind a lot of investment in a really important relationship with a partner and children in a short period of time if they're not aware of the costs of leaving. So constraints are can kind of be a very positive thing. They to define them, you have to sort of define it negatively, but they can act very positively to sort of anchor us a little more and keep us from being overly impulsive and wrecking something important when we're unhappy for a bit. And for a lot of people at different times that are challenging, one of the strongest motivations to keep going and to try to work it out is what's best for the kids, for the sake of the kids, my contact with the kids. Any variation of that theme becomes a really important internal dynamic. And one of the things that can happen, it doesn't have to happen, is when somebody's feeling a lot of constraint and the dedication is worn off a bit, or maybe a lot, actually. The constraint can keep them going. And if they start doing things again, to sort of show their investment, their willingness, their interest in strengthening the relationship, whatever those things might be. Uh, you can see an instance where constraint works its way back around to push on dedication getting developed again. Originally, in most relationships, well, this is less so these days than it used to be, but ideally in a relationship, dedication develops first, and then constraint comes along with it as people invest in the relationship and spend time and do things together and stuff. And then you get more and more constrained because that's how it works. But it's also true that constraint, somebody can just sit and mope around in a lot of constraint, or they can use it to motivate redeveloping dedication. Um, okay, next question. Kay Reed asks, why is it important for what's important for young people to know about attachment versus commitment? So if we take, I'm going to take the Jane Austen version of attachment here about sort of romantic attachment. What's so important for young people to understand is that you might feel a really strong romantic attachment with somebody. It could just be sexual attraction, but let's say it's more than that. It's really emotional. There's a connection. You really think like, wow, this is like a thing. And this could be my future, or this is my right now. This is really important. Um, I'm going to, in some ways, answer this better in a way, but people should understand that that doesn't mean much of anything about whether the other person is actually committed to them. People can way overinterpret the power of attachment and attraction early on as commitment when it may not be commitment at all. In fact, some people, and we all know this is true, some people these days are in a just talking relationship with somebody and where an attachment is sort of developing. Like Scott Sibley has written about this really well, and others have as well. But that sort of relationship, it doesn't mean that they're not just talking with somebody else also, and maybe multiple other people at the same time. People are too quick to read into commitment things that aren't signs of commitment, which is what I'm going to end on when I get through the rest of my slides. Okay, I'm going to move on for the moment. I know there's another question there from Alan, but let me get to this goo of stuff, which is the intersection of choice, free will, and constraint. Because this stuff is like fundamentally involved in the deep goo of what commitment is and how relationships work. And it also gets right back at some of the kinds of things that Galina and I have focused on in our work, which is just profound. To me, it's just stuff I love thinking about. I love uh, wondering about because there's a lot to it. So choice and free will. Commitment is enhanced by the perception of free will or a choice. What a simple way to what we mean by that is when people have a sense that I chose this or I'm choosing this, that I'm not just swept up in it or it didn't just happen to me, that's going to strengthen the sense that I'm committed here, that this is a committed situation or it's a relationship in which I am committed. That kind of is another way to answer the question that Alan asked a bit ago, in terms of how we can strengthen a sense of commitment in ourselves and in our relationship. One of the most important things is having a sense of choosing, that we be aware that I chose this, as opposed to just sort of it happened to me, and that other people can see that we chose this choice. Free will is really important, but there is sort of a paradox here, and I'm going to put up another quote from my dissertation uh, uh, from the work of another scholar to really get at sort of what I think is a challenge here for people to understand. And this is a really important point, the second bullet, if just to think about constraint versus dedication. It's easy to see all of dedication about choice and decisions. Strongly formed commitments are founded when people are choosing to be constrained. I'm saying that very carefully, and this is a bit into the next slide, so this is just a preview of where we're going in a minute. People can get very constrained very easily in a relationship without having chosen to be. When you see a healthy, strong commitment in a relationship between two people, and then let's say it's like actually at the level of a marital commitment or some strong commitment like that, uh, and it was a conscious choice. There will have been a time or a moment, may have been a wedding ceremony, but it could have been a number of sort of moments that have this characteristic where one or both consciously chose to be constrained. I saw what was happening. This is what I decided I wanted. Uh, and that's part of the paradox of constraints. To define them, you got to kind of get in a negative sort of mode about how you say what they do, because that's the easiest place to get. They're what keeps you there when you might want to leave. But originally, in a healthy, strong commitment, they're chosen. I'm choosing to be constrained on this path with this person, and that's fundamental to the nature of commitment. And one of my favorite one-liners over the years is commitment is making a choice to give up other choices. So here's this quote that I think gets at a really complex point that I won't belabor, but I want to go through just a bit about. Uh, a researcher named Claude Felter wrote, choice, or I wrote this about Claude Felter's work, choice as a factor in marital commitment involves the perception each partner has. Actually, I do think this is a quote, that he or she freely chose to enter the relationship and could choose to terminate it if he or she desired. Unless this perception of choice exists, one feels more obligated or entrapped than committed. Marital commitment is enhanced by the perception of free choice. So that's kind of the point I just made, except it has a few angles in it that are really important to note. This part where it says, unless the perception of choice exists, one feels more obligated or entrapped. That's absolutely going to be true. But go back to what I said a minute ago, and this is where it gets complex. When it's really a strong, solid, good commitment, the person chose to be constrained. They're going to have a sense that choice doesn't exist anymore in some way because I chose to give up choice. That's what I'm doing when I commit. So I what I like to emphasize in this quote is that sort of the first line that they freely chose, that's past tense. Ideally, you want the early stage of the relationship to have a lot of room to freely choose to be committed. Later on, one may even by self-imposition not feel so free to choose anymore because I chose to obligate myself. Now, somebody, it's a really dangerous or destructive relationship, those caveats always exist here. you'd want a person to feel like a sense of free will again to do what they need to do to keep themselves or their children safe. So make sure you heard that. But a lot of times we do have and should have a sense of having diminished choice because we chose to give it up, give it up. That's kind of the healthier pattern. Now, um, timing is everything. So that this is really the timing point. And you'll notice I constructed the top of that slide pretty carefully. Rhodes and Stanley, Stanley and Rhodes. And the reason why I did that is on a lot of different kinds of things in this realm. Galena and I don't really know who exactly said what or thought what first. We've had so many talks about stuff in terms of all the work that we've done and the things that we've written about commitment and written about cohabitation and the development of commitment. I like just putting it that way. So there's ways commitment can develop. That's really the key. Attachment can lead to decisions, or people can slide through transitions and have constraint grow and develop, and that's what we call inertia. So a lot of relationships these days develop a lot of inertia early on because people are sliding through important moments where they could have chosen. They could have been more reflective. They could have made a decision. They could have gotten more information. They could have, if nothing else, just have gone more slowly. Going slow would save a whole lot of people a lot of pain and a lot of heartache in relationships. But when people are going fast, and let's say they end up moving in together fast, because this is to me the prototypical example, because people don't see this. They're sliding through a transition without a discussion, without a decision, without clarity about what this means or where we're headed. And they've greatly increased the difficulty of leaving before they've actually decided that they want to stay, before they're sure this is where I want to be. And you and I are both choosing this. Here we are, we're living together, we have stuff. It's now going to be much harder. It's not impossible to break up. People that are living together break up all the time. But that's why that work becomes so important as an area of testing theories about commitment. It's absolutely the case that they've increased inertia. And a lot of times for a lot of couples, that comes before the two people have really understood each other and really understood whether there's a commitment between the two. So either path will have growing constraints. So either we're getting more attached and I'm choosing to be committed and we've both chosen in some way over time. That's one way. And the other path, we just like let stuff go. We slide through stuff and here we are. Now let me make a few more points and then I'll get to these questions. One of the problems with inertia, and I was actually having a lot of fun in the last week talking about this with AI, Gemini, believe it or not. I was putting in some ideas from some of our papers and asking about some other constructs and things that people have written about that I knew about, and having Gemini sort of work on what was the synthesis. It was a blast, actually. Um, and this is an important way to describe what I was just saying as the problem of inertia and when it's premature. Is when a relationship is less locked down, there's much more free to vary. But when people have inertialized it with a lot of inertia early on, then there's no room for the kind of uncertainty that Linda Mom talked about decades ago. She wrote really well about when the context is sort of tighter or more structured in that way, it makes it harder to develop trust because you can't read the motivation of the other. Are they there just because it got hard to leave? Am I with you just because I got swept up in this, or because I really want to be here? Or do I know you really want to be here? Or I just, maybe you're trapped. And so it ends up in this sort of interpretive dead zone. And that makes it hard for somebody, both people, to see what Thibault and Kelly talked about, the transformation of motivation, when two people move from it just being me versus you to us. And here's a couple lines from this Gemini chat. We trade the chaos of not knowing if they'll stay for the silence of not knowing why they do. I couldn't write that sentence better than Gemini did, so I'm going to cite Gemini for that. And then this one, based on it, right, coming from our work, inertia doesn't just make it harder to leave, it makes it harder to be known. That's really powerful. Now, one of the consequences, and I'll just deal with this briefly, uh, a question here, Rosaline, about the health of a relationship when one's more committed or one's committed and the other's not. I won't go into that, but you can find plenty of blog articles on that. Galena and I have published a lot of work on asymmetrical commitment, and we believe it's fundamentally much more likely to happen in these contexts where things develop too rapidly and people are just rolling through transitions without decisions. COVID, absolutely. The next question on there. Hi, Claire. COVID uh, altered some of this, at least for a while, because a lot of people early on with COVID moved faster in a relationship than maybe they otherwise would have uh, because of the situation and not wanting to be sort of isolated as the lockdown was happening. Okay, let me make a quick other point and then we'll wrap up. Because some people have asked, and what's a valid signal? If you're thinking, and all of us here, we're talking about youth, people are in this sort of context of relationship development and people making good decisions in their life. It's a great question to work through with people. And you can have this discussion with young people, with young adults, with old adults. You can have this discussion with anybody. What's a valid signal of commitment? Because I think back to this point I made about from Sense and Sensibility, people have a lot of trouble sort of knowing, well, what's a valid signal of commitment? How could I actually know this person could commit to me? I have a blog article on that. Also, I will put that link in the resources. Rachel and Kim help me remember that. But here's just three quick points to sort of wrap up on. One is the behavior has to be related to something about commitment. And so it has to reflect effort. It has to reflect some sort of decision or intention in the other, not just something that the circumstance maybe is compelling them to do. That's why keeping things early on free of constraints for a while is really important because I need room to see whether they're doing this nice thing just because they know they have to like be around me for 2 hours tonight, or because they really like me and want to be with me. And the behavior has to be under the control of the one doing it. So whatever it is, one has, this is really a version of that same point about constraint and inertia and things getting too wrapped up too soon for a lot of people. You have to be able to see it as free volition. And one of the th themes that comes out in the commitment literature that we've done work on and others have done work on, and really strongly fits a lot of nice theory, is that one of the ways you can see commitment is in sacrifices. When you have an angle of seeing in somebody else or seeing in yourself that the person did something they didn't have to do. Maybe it was something that was a little costly. If you relate this to signal theory and economics, valid signals have some cost. So it's something that you could actually see that either you're doing or they're doing that they didn't have to do, and they're doing it for you. They're doing it for the other. They're doing it for the children. They're doing it for the good of the relationship. Those are moments that really allow somebody to see a bit of that transformation and motivation again, to see that something really is different here. It's not just a transactional relationship, but you would give something to me, I would give something to you that's a little above and beyond. Last comment, small beats big here, because sometimes when people try to do a big sacrifice, the sacrifice itself has too much of a reward built into it. It's over subsidized, as an economist would say. So it's some big public show. It's proposing at a big sports arena when your partner's got no sense of what's going. That's like more about the person doing it. There's a performance. You're looking for small behaviors where they're not they might be performative in the sense that you're choosing to perform it or your partner is choosing to perform it, but the performance isn't the thing. The thing is, I'm motivated to do this for you because I love you and I'm committed to you. That's the good stuff, and that's where the power is going to be and what we can see in a relationship. There, that's what I have for you today. Back to you, Rachel.
Dr. Stanley, I just have to say thank you so much for your presentation today. It was absolutely fantastic. Um, I am going to my sister's wedding on Friday and I'm working on the speech for it. And I was like, I think I need to incorporate some of your vast knowledge into that speech. So thank you for the inspiration there and for all of the insight that you shared with us today. We truly appreciate it. I want to take a quick moment to say I saw some questions come in through the chat. Please go ahead and drop those in the Q&A box. That will help us when we do follow up after the webinar to make sure that we address those questions and they don't get lost. So if you wrote something in the chat, please take a moment, copy and paste it into the Q&A, and we'll make sure we follow up with you after today's session. So with that being said, there is going to be a brief survey at the end of this webinar. We ask that you take a quick moment to provide us with that feedback. As Kim mentioned in the chat, the webinar is going to be available in the next probably 3 days or so. It'll be available on our website. It will also be sent to you via email, as well as the handouts and resources that Dr. Stanley mentioned earlier in his presentation. If you need a certificate to say that you were here today, please go ahead and email kim@dibblesinstitute.org. And we want to just do a quick shout out for our next month's presenter, where Melanie Herman will be talking about navigating risk when risk is everywhere, which is particularly relevant for any folks who are joining us from the nonprofit world. But I think all of us can learn something from that. So I thank you all for being here with us on this Wednesday. Thank you again, Dr. Stanley, and we look forward to seeing everybody next month. Have a great one.